Hi, welcome. This is Jackie Cambridge. Welcome to one of our short videos to support your Nebosh health and safety qualification. In this particular video, we're going to explore one of the hidden killers, asbestos. Asbestos. Asbestos is a natural material. It's a mineral. You can mine it from the ground. And it's very versatile, it's heat proof, fireproof, it has insulating qualities, and because it was readily available in a range of countries from America, Canada and Russia, fortunes were made mining it out of the ground and converting it into a range of different materials which could be used in the building trade and in domestic premises. So you might have seen corrugated asbestos sheeting, it was put into Artex in the ceilings, it was woven into fire blankets, it was sprayed on to reduce the risk of fire and heat spread. You could have ceiling tiles, floor tiles, lagging, etc. There are very few things that asbestos wasn't used in. So what is asbestos? As I've mentioned, it's a natural material. You can mine it from the ground, break it down and identify. And asbestos is actually a term used for a variety of different substances, but the thing that they have in common is they're all very, very fibrous. So they have lots of very fine fibers in there. We've got a range of different asbestos which have been used within buildings. We've got blue, which is crocidolite. We've got brown, which is known as amosite or grunerite. And we've got white, which is chrysotile. They are actually all different substances, but they're all very fibrous. White chrysotile is the one that's believed to be less hazardous because this is the one that has swirly, curly fibers rather than blue and brown are very thin, straight fibers, very aerodynamic and can get into your lungs more readily. There are not just 3 types of asbestos, there are lots of different types of asbestos. Brown, blue and white are the most common in the UK. We do occasionally get tremolite, which is known as red asbestos. Just for info, if you look at the asbestos fibres under a microscope, they don't look those colours. They were just given those colours as names, easy names that people could use to identify them. Okay, so we've got a variety of asbestos types used in buildings throughout the UK. So examples of asbestos, showed you some pictures in the first slide, but it was used in lagging, as you can see in the picture here. And if the lagging is in good condition, it's not a problem. It's when it gets damaged, like you can see here, and the fibres become airborne. It's heat proof and fireproof, so asbestos was used in fire protection panels, behind fires and boilers and in electrical insulation gear to reduce the risk of fire. It was used inside fire doors. It was used, as I say, as insulation boards to keep heat in, ceiling tiles, rope. It was woven into rope to make it strong. It was added to cement to give cement additional strength. And it was formed into corrugated sheets that you might see on buildings, agricultural buildings, sheds, etc. So here we've got some asbestos sprayed on some structural steel there to reduce the risk of heat spread. We've got corrugated asbestos sheeting there, and the grey panels that you can see on those particular buildings there, again, they've got asbestos in them. So asbestos was used in a variety of different places. And in some cases, if you've got an old building, sometimes we've lost track of where the asbestos was. It may not have been in there originally, but it might even have been added during any renovation work. So asbestos is a fibrous substance. If the fibres are contained, it's not a problem. If those fibres get out into the air, that's when the problem arises. So asbestos can cause a range of different ill health effects in people, and they're all chronic. Can you remember what chronic means? So chronic conditions are conditions that usually occur over a period of time, and usually we're exposed to the substance more than once. People may say one asbestos fibre is all it takes to kill you, but in reality, if you look at somebody's lung, they will normally have thousands, if not millions, of asbestos fibres there. The lung that you can see in the bottom of the picture, each one of those little black specks is where there's been some asbestos, and our own immune system, our phagocytes, have tried to dissolve it. They haven't succeeded, and then they've scarred the lungs. And that didn't happen overnight. So we have asbestosis or fibrosis, a form of cancer linked to the scarring of our lungs. Asbestos, unfortunately, also causes just ordinary lung cancer, and it causes another form of cancer called mesothelioma. The mesothelium is the lining of the lungs, and it's what stops your lungs attaching themselves to your rib cage. It's nice and wet, but unfortunately mesothelioma is a cancer that attacks that lining. It dries out the lungs, and then your lungs cannot take in oxygen and give out carbon monoxide. And unfortunately, mesothelioma is usually terminal, and usually terminal within a year or 6 months. Mainly it's the lungs at risk from asbestos, but it is a fibrous substance, so it can cause skin warts and dermatitis as well. But it's the lung one that's the main issue. Asbestos also leads to pleural plaques. Your lungs have alveoli, which are little air sacs, and they're just one cell thick. They allow the oxygen in and the carbon dioxide out. A pleural plaque makes that little alveoli lining solid. So the picture that I'm just going to show you now, if I can move my own image. Here, that should be a nice, supple, one cell thick lining of your lungs. As you can see, there's a thick casing of what looks like a white substance, just like a thick plaque on your teeth. So it's making your lungs solid, which means they cannot allow the oxygen and the carbon dioxide through. Pleural plaques are not a cancer, but if you've got a pleural plaque, it's a bit like saying you've been exposed to asbestos and you may be quite high risk. Because asbestos is a hazardous substance, we've known about it for several years, we have some legislation controlling asbestos. And we've had asbestos legislation for many, many years. The legislation that we've got now covers two types of people: the people that have got a building that may contain asbestos, and the people that work with asbestos and remove asbestos from buildings. So it's all in one set of regulations. So if you're an employer, you have a duty to manage the risks of asbestos. So if your building was built before the year 2000, this applies to you. After the year 2000, hopefully, she says, touch wood, it shouldn't have any asbestos in it. So if you've got a building, a non-domestic premises, i.e. work building, your employer has a duty to identify the presence of asbestos. This is by usually getting an asbestos survey done. It may be what we call a management survey if you're just using the building, or a refurbishment and demolition survey if you're having any building work done. Once you've had the survey done by a competent person, you should compile, or they will compile, a register for you showing where all your asbestos is, what type of asbestos it is, and what condition it's in. So the register is an important thing if you're getting any building work done, because anyone doing the building work needs to know where the asbestos is, what condition it's in. The regulations also set limits on how much those people working with asbestos can be exposed to, and it's very, very low. It's a European piece of legislation. There is a requirement to do a suitable and sufficient risk assessment for workers who are likely to be exposed to asbestos. That might be your own staff, but it might be other people coming into the building, people doing maintenance and repairs. If you've got your survey done and you've got your register, even if you're not doing any refurbishment work, you have a legal duty as an employer to have a written scheme or a plan to make sure you keep a check on any asbestos that you've got. If it's in good condition, leave it where it is, but check on its condition. If it deteriorates or it gets damaged, then we're going to be thinking about getting it removed. We've got 3 types of asbestos work, and outside of the realm of our sort of full syllabus, but just to put you in the picture, if it's very low risk work, so literally you've got a panel which is made of asbestos, it's not damaged in any way, and you just literally undo the screws and remove it, that would be what we would call non-notifiable work. People are unlikely to be exposed to adverse amounts of asbestos, and the job's going to take them less than an hour. Then we've got notifiable work, which we and our employees can do following the right safe systems. But notifiable means you still have to notify the health and safety executive, and you have to keep a record of the people that are working with asbestos and provide them with some health surveillance. The highest level is what we call licensed work. We have a number of contractors licensed by the HSE to work with and remove asbestos, and that's the highest degree, what we call licensed work. So if you've got some asbestos panels or you've got asbestos lagging that's damaged and it needs to be removed, you're going to be needing to use a licensed contractor to remove that asbestos. Anybody working with or exposed to asbestos has to be given sufficient training, but again, the higher the risk. The people doing licensed work, it's having specific training and refresher training. Those people working with asbestos and even doing building work, training and refresher training. It may not all be taught courses. Once you've had the proper training, you can do toolbox talks and things like that, but it's reminding people of the importance of hazards associated with asbestos and what they need to do. Anybody who's working with asbestos, whether it's licensed or notifiable, has to be under health surveillance. So an occupational health doctor or nurse is keeping an eye on them to make sure that they're not getting any ill health effects or lung conditions. So if we've got some asbestos, if it's in good condition, we might live with it and keep a check on it. If it's in bad condition, we're going to get it removed. So every company, if you've got a building with asbestos, you must have a nominated person to coordinate your management of asbestos. If you've got asbestos, even if it's in good condition, it needs to be inspected regularly, and those inspections need to be recorded. So you have an asbestos register. Where is your asbestos? What type of asbestos is it? What condition is it in? It may well be to remind people that these materials do contain asbestos. You might need to do some labelling, but you need to think about where and how you do that, because you don't want to be, perhaps scaring people. If you're going to get asbestos removed and there's any risk of the fibres becoming airborne, you're going to use your licensed contractors, and any asbestos waste is going to be hazardous waste. So it needs to be removed by a company licensed and permitted to allow and take away asbestos waste. Those who remove asbestos will normally build a purpose-built enclosure, contain the area with its own ventilation system, so that the fibres, any fibres that are in the air, are sucked in and not pushed out into the adjacent areas. Ideally, if we think we might be working with asbestos, even drilling a hole, we're going to perhaps damp it down and wet it, so that keeps the fibres in, stops them becoming airborne. We're going to have a Class H vacuum cleaner, so we can suck in any particular air and fibres before they come into the air. And as I've mentioned, if you've got an enclosure, or if we're doing even minor work with asbestos and there's a likelihood of fibres becoming or dust becoming airborne, then we're going to have good ventilation so that it's contained, not spread elsewhere. Depending on the type of asbestos work being undertaken, if it's removal by licensed contractors, we're going to be sampling the atmosphere before they do the job, when they do the job, and at the end to make sure the area is clear. We equally may get those people to be wearing a personal sampling badge so we can monitor how much they personally have been exposed to. So we might do area sampling and monitoring of the people to check their exposure. Equally, we know the biggest risk is breathing in asbestos, so it's really important that people are wearing the correct respiratory protective equipment. It may be an air-fed hood, as you can see in this picture here. It may be a mask or an ordinary respirator, and it may even be full self-contained breathing apparatus. And anybody wearing RPE for work with asbestos would need to have had a face fit test to make sure it's forming a good seal and nothing is getting in. So we've had a potted tour about asbestos. It's a natural mineral. It's one of the most fibrous substances known to mankind. It's when it's airborne and we breathe it in that the problem arises. It leads to chronic ill health conditions that might take 5, 10, 20, or even 40 years to come out. Okay, so prevention is the best thing, stopping it getting into our breathing mechanism. So if we've got asbestos, we have a duty to manage asbestos in our building, and the same regulations also apply to companies who remove and work with asbestos. They've got to do a risk assessment, train their staff, take steps to minimise the release of asbestos, do air sampling, etc. So I hope that's been useful to you. Thank you very much for watching.